On this episode of Newt's World, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act reduces taxes, reduces or increases spending for various federal government programs, increases the statutory debt limit, and addresses agencies and programs throughout the federal government. It is known as a reconciliation bill and includes legislation submitted by 11 House committees. The act passed the House on May 22nd with 215 yeas, 215 noes, and one member voting present, about as narrow a margin as you can get. The act is now being considered by the Senate and is receiving some criticism from Elon Musk and others. Here to talk about the bill, I am really pleased to welcome my guest, Matthew Henderson. He is the Interim Chief Government Affairs Officer at America First Policy Institute. Matthew, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
Would you start by talking about the work you did with Save America Coalition to help kill the Biden Build Back Better bill in 2021, and how that led you into the work you've done over the last 3 years on One Big Beautiful Bill?
Absolutely. I'm happy to. Taking a step back, if we remember what was going on in 2021, America First Policy Institute was just getting started, and the Biden administration, who had just come into office, was looking at passing their agenda, and it's almost like they took their entire agenda and they put it into legislative bill text. They passed one reconciliation bill rather quickly. The other bill, it was the Build Back Better agenda. This was a monstrosity of a bill. This was introduced early on in the year. And as America First Policy Institute was building up as a think tank, we were attracting talent from the first Trump administration, and a lot of folks were coming together and watching this process unfold in front of us. And this bill, there's really no other way to explain it other than a big government socialism bill. This bill would have fundamentally reshaped the society that we lived in, turning it into a socialist society. And there was tremendous momentum against this bill. And as the process moved along, I came on board with AFPI in about October, and I was hired to run a conservative coalition of a number of organizations. At the time, we had about 60 organizations, conservative, fiscally conscious organizations and groups that decided to come together and really make an effort to take a stand against this bill. There were about 6 organizations initially that came together, and as time went on, I was tasked with the responsibility of putting together a campaign, identifying some of the worst provisions that were in this bill, and it's no wonder it was such a bad bill it couldn't get traction in Congress. It wasn't moving, and that granted us an opportunity and a window to highlight some of these horrible provisions that were in this bill. And ultimately, it came down to the end of December, and a lot of the work that we had done in highlighting some of these issues that you've written about before, Mr. Speaker, and I think you can remember that time very clearly of what was going on because it was outrageous, some of the things that were being proposed. Eventually made it to December and were able to successfully kill that portion of the bill. It came down to what was going on with Senator Manchin in West Virginia. We were able to simply talk about how this bill would have decimated energy jobs. This bill would have raised gas prices. This bill would have outsourced jobs to China and the Communist Party of China. This bill would have essentially condoned the use of slave labor of what was going on with the Uyghur population that was in China. And we just brought those issues to the voters. They spoke up and they told Senator Manchin, absolutely don't vote for this bill. And he held a press conference saying that he was not going to support the bill, and that was the epitaph of the Build Back Better bill. So we successfully were able to stop that bill. Unfortunately, it reared its head again, but the reality is we were able to save about $4.5 trillion in taxpayers' savings, and that's something pretty remarkable.
It seems to me that the brilliance of creating, with Brooke Rollins and Linda McMahon taking the lead, in thinking through and creating the America First Policy Institute and bringing together an extraordinary level of talent who had already had experience in the first Trump administration. Describe for folks the impact of America First Policy Institute and how you saw it operating and the things it was doing.
Well, coming into the organization, I had spent time on campaigns. I had spent time working in the House as a staffer and in the Senate as a staffer. And people were expecting the president to have a second term. And a lot of the minds that came together that came out of that first administration, there was a lot of work that went into a second agenda and how that agenda was going to look in the president's second term. And when we weren't afforded to have a second term, a lot of work went into that agenda. And Brooke Rollins, who was our CEO and president at the time, and Linda McMahon, who's now Secretary of Education. So, of course, Brooke Rollins is Secretary of Agriculture, and Mr. Kudlow came together as well, really recognized that there was an opportunity to take that agenda and some of the issues that they were working on and to still further the momentum of the movement, to keep that momentum going, because there was a desire to retain staff, to keep people engaged, to keep the movement engaged. You know, the president started something, and nobody knew that he was going to run again at that time. But we knew that the ideas were powerful. We knew that the ideas needed to continue. We recognized that the ideas needed research, and they needed to be built out. So as you look back and kind of see how America First started, it was in a small room in Northern Virginia where Brooke Rollins was head of the Domestic Policy Council in the White House. Several others who were in the West Wing went from the West Wing to a small office in Virginia just to continue this cause and movement. And it's kind of astonishing that a handful of staffers, I want to say maybe about 10 or 15 individuals who were in that room, grew into an organization of over 200 strong, just over a few short years. And one of the things that we first published was the America First Agenda. This was a collection of about 196 policies that were recommendations that we took to members' offices, that we took to the Senate, and we kept those ideas alive. We kept those ideas moving forward, and a lot of that paved the way to the policies that we're seeing now. The policies that we're seeing in this one big, beautiful bill really originated from that agenda that the president first came up with in his first term.
I really believe that without the hard work of the American First Policy Institute, that it would have been impossible to have had the last 5 months moving as rapidly as they did, that you really have a clear coming together, if you will, of the ideas, the people, and also the practicality. This wasn't just a think tank in the abstract sense. These are people who had been in government, understood government, and wanted to force real change, not just write interesting papers. Now, you sort of reversed your role. You played a significant role in defeating the Biden bill, and now you're playing a significant role in trying to pass the one big beautiful bill. How does it feel to have flipped from opposition yelling no to a governing majority trying to find a way to say yes?
It's a little bit of a learning curve. I remember when we first kind of started on this process and when the sequencing of issues was going on, and you look at what can be included and what can't. It's not every day that you get the opportunity under unity of governance to have an opportunity like this to pass one big, beautiful bill. So the mindset was, for so long, we had these policies that we had to highlight how bad they were for the last 4 years, to suddenly a shift. And voters spoke very loud and clear last year in November, overwhelmingly rejecting a lot of those radical policy ideas, and now we're put in a position of governance. And so instead of highlighting the worst of the issues, you want to highlight really the best of the issues. And we know that this is a hard task, it's a long road, and that members who are working on these issues in the House and the Senate need to be supported for their work. So it's a shift from really attacking to supporting. And I remember the first time I was in a leadership office and we were talking through some of these issues. And it's important to remember that this is a conservative approach and that we're not looking to attack, we're looking to support and highlight and educate. So it's a little bit more on the education side instead of the highlighting some of the other things.
Going way up to, say, a 50,000-foot level, how would you describe to an average, everyday American the difference in the future between this bill passing and this bill failing to pass?
This bill is our one shot. To put it in perspective, this bill is part of a larger plan. This bill is part of the president's strategy to accelerate economic growth. This is one pillar to that plan, and it needs to happen. Our spending is too high. Our spending needs to come down. We also need to cut taxes to accelerate growth. This bill does all of that. This bill includes more in it that will actually create American jobs, fatten middle-class wallets. That's one fundamental way to think about this bill, and that's the approach we need. And we need the policies to achieve that. And cutting taxes, expanding the base is a key fundamental way of achieving that growth.
The tax side of this is pretty complicated. Can you sort of walk us through the key elements, starting, of course, with the fact that if we don't extend the 2017 tax cuts, we will have a massive tax increase, and virtually every American is opposed to increasing taxes.
Absolutely. A good way to think about it, and of course it changes based on where you live, how large your family size is, but a good way to think about it is if this wasn't extended, of course we're talking about the president's tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was put in place and enacted in 2017. If it was not extended, if this is something that doesn't pass, that means families will lose between a range about $700 to about $7,200 per year. Now that's based on family size and of course where they actually live, but that is a sizable amount of money. And for families living, for example, in Arizona, they could see a loss of close to $4,000 in take-home pay, according to our own analysis at AFPI. This is something that we don't need in this economy right now. And when I speak to the economic growth side of it, we have an economy that's growing. I don't know if you saw the latest numbers coming out of the Atlanta Fed, but the number was 3.8. Now, what that means is already our economy is growing twice as fast. The Q2 numbers came out, and our economy is growing twice as fast based on everything that the president's doing on his trade agenda and based on the anticipation of this bill as it moves through Congress. Already we're seeing a lot of the positive effects of some of the policies that are going through right now.
I've been talking about the combination of what he's doing with tariffs to make it more desirable to manufacture in the United States, what he's doing with this bill, and what he's done just as a good marketer. I mean, in his one trip to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, he picked up in 4 days $1 trillion in orders for American products and $1 trillion commitment to invest in the United States economy. Now, the momentum of those kind of deals has to mean that I think by next summer, we could be in a Trump boom. But the key to that is to pass this bill, and it's an extraordinarily complicated bill. Can you walk through just some of the provisions that people need to be aware of that give you a sense of the scale of effort going into this?
Yes, absolutely. And I think really the best way to describe it is Americans are going to support this bill, and we're already seeing the more and more they learn about that, the more supportive they are because it spends less government money. It prevents one of the largest tax hikes in history, which is the tax savings that I was talking about a little bit earlier. And of course, it supercharges economic growth. And that means more investment coming into this country, which creates jobs, which grows jobs, and creates fatter paychecks, which is something that everybody likes to see. I think some of the important components to this are, one, it stops malign foreign actors from undercutting our American workers. And what I mean by saying that is that it secures the border. We've heard about border security for years. Voters are beginning to recognize that when the president says he's going to secure the border, he actually means it. And he has the policies that can show action on that. This bill provides extra funding so that he can finish building the wall, hire the necessary personnel to put in place to make sure that border is secure, and also invest in technology in order to keep that border secure. This helps him continue to fulfill the largest deportation effort, which is something that the president has talked about. We keep seeing these stories about some of the hatred and some of the unrest that's going on college campuses, which is something that's just outrageous to think about in this beautiful country of ours that's happening. That has to do with some of these visas that haven't been updated in such a long time, and it's malign foreign actors who are in a lot of these places, and they're not actually Americans. Another one is this bill actually keeps more money in the pockets of every American. I've talked about the tax component, but when we see things like no tax on tips or no overtime pay, an enhanced deduction for seniors, no tax on car loan interest, and of course the ever-famous no death tax. These are things that are all focused on growing the economy and keeping more money in Americans' paychecks. We also see some other provisions in here that are meant to empower parents and really protect women and children. I don't think the long-term play is that there will be men playing in girls' sports, but we want to make sure that we're able to restore American values, which is a key pillar for change and something that we need to get back to and something that voters spoke loud and clearly to support. It stops taxpayer funds for child sex mutilation, which is something that's astonishing that has gone on for such a long period of time. But, Mr. Speaker, for the longest time, Medicaid dollars have actually been going to fund some of these surgeries. This bill puts a stop to that. We see some other things in here that are very good for education as well, in terms of putting parents' rights over their children's education again. We have expanded educational options for school choice. What that means is there's going to be more support for things like homeschooling. That means there's going to be more support for things that are alternatives to public education but doesn't erode from public education. We also see certain things that just need to be restored, like DEI or radical gender ideology that has really penetrated a lot of schools. So certain funding elements are really reformed and put back to where they should be. And we also see some very unique things like the pro-life enhanced adoption tax credit. What that means is that for families who want to adopt, that means you can get $5,000, a $5,000 refund in terms of the costs and fees that you're actually moving forward with an adoption. And as we know, adoptions can be incredibly expensive. So this is a step in the right direction towards our values. And I can keep going on and on and on. There's actually a list I know that we've seen come out of all the latest and greatest things, but that's just a little bit of some of the great things that are in this bill.
The one thing I do want to focus on just for a minute, as I understand it, on the tax zone, it's actually very favorable to small business and significantly helps small businesses.
Does. There's a number of pro-business things that are in this bill. Full expensing that is able to help manufacturing. This bill is pro-manufacturing. It's pro-start a business. It is some very unique things that the America First Policy Institute has spent a lot of time on are these opportunity zones. We've heard about these opportunity zones perhaps before, but what these are certain tax zones and structures that were up for renewal next year. These were renewed and continue to be put in place. It's their pro-growth element. So they allow for reinvestment in economically challenged areas, urban areas. So it allows for reinvestment in our community. And it's a good alternative for businesses to invest in and also reinvest in our cities. There's also other pro-growth tax reforms, and that key word there is pro-growth. We just want to be really focused on growing the economy in a positive way. There's a lot of pro-growth reforms to boost up economic growth, like small business exemptions for manufacturing, which I've already mentioned, and just a number of provisions that actually help that regard and push the economic pro-growth side forward.
By the way, in terms of being pro-growth, it seems to me that one of the great problems in passing this bill is that the Congressional Budget Office is just ridiculously left-wing and refuses to score economic growth. That if you actually take what will probably happen based on the Reagan years and what we did when I was Speaker, this bill should get us up to at least 3 or 3.5% growth. And I think they're scoring it at like 1.2. So what that does for our listeners is it means all of the extra revenue that would come in because the economy gets bigger, more people go to work, more people get pay raises, more companies make a profit. All of those things help pay for the bill. And consistently, the Congressional Budget Office has refused to score the scale of change that occurs when you get the right kind of positive pro-growth policies. And it seems to me that that's one of the things Congress should fix, is that the Congressional Budget Office is very left-wing and is 525 bureaucrats who specialize in underrating how good our reforms are and really underrating how effective our tax cuts are. What's your thought on that?
I think you're absolutely right, and that's why I wanted to lead with that surprising news. I'm not going to say it's surprising because it's a realistic approach. The Atlanta Federal Reserve came out with their number for the accelerated growth based on Q2 this year alone at 3.8%. So that means our economy is already growing twice as fast, and in terms of the CBO, 3 times as fast.
I'm going to go on X and Truth Social and ask the question, what was the Congressional Budget Office score for the second quarter?
I think it was right around 1.2% or something ridiculous.
So if you just adjust how wrong they were for the entire bill, you literally pay for the bill by the scale of economic growth, which they refuse to admit existed. It's a fascinating story. Let me ask you, though, the one glitch that's come up in the last few days, we can't talk about the bill without confronting this head on. We get this writing on X by Elon Musk who says, quote, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it." Now, I have to tell you, my first reaction was he was off his meds, and I don't quite know what he's doing. But if you were debating him, how would you answer all those charges?
Well, it's a little confusing. I guess I'm perplexed because this bill actually reverses the spending curse plague. There's been a spending curse on D.C., and you know this more than anybody else in this country, but D.C. has been on a trajectory of more and more and more and more spending. It's continuous. This bill actually delivers the largest deficit reduction in nearly 30 years with $1.6 trillion in mandatory savings. To put that in layman's terms, it's the largest single reduction in spending in Congress's history in terms of the level of mandatory spending that this bill actually cuts. So that is astonishing. And I don't think that no tax on tips or no tax on overtime or things like saving costs for seniors are elements that would be considered pork. You know, pork is bringing something back for enriching that wealthiest 1% of people in this country. And that is something that the Build Back Better bill did. That bill was riddled with special interest savings. I don't understand how this bill, something like finishing the president's border wall, keeping Americans safe, I don't understand how that's pork. I don't understand how this bill protects Medicaid for Americans who truly need it. I don't think that that would be something that would be considered pork on top of saving taxpayers. In some cases, I've mentioned some of those numbers before, but in some cases it's close to $14,000 in take-home pay. So it keeps going on and on and on. And plus the bill includes some recommendations that even Elon Musk put in himself in terms of the Doge cuts. Now that has to do with a separate companion package to this, but that $9.4 billion in savings that Doge initially identified, that's something that's going to be a companion to this bill. So he's essentially trashing in his own work. I guess I'm a little perplexed at what's going on.
I'm curious, you have, I think, a very significant bill. It has lots of pieces in it. Everybody can find some reason to be a no, but if you're going to govern, you also have to find a reason to be a yes. I'm a little surprised that some of the members who go bouncing back and forth, but it strikes me that it's really central to having the economy grow and to begin to bend the spending curve that this bill passed. I say this from a background when I was Speaker. We balanced the federal budget for 4 years in a row for the only time in the last 100 years. So we have some sense of how to do this. And I think that this actually helps us move in the right direction. I think people need to confront this. This is one piece of a series of things that need to happen over the next 3 or 4 years. And I think that if you do those things, you're in fact going to dramatically reduce the deficit and ultimately get to a balanced budget, which we proved in the 90s you could actually do it. It's not a theory. Well, what's your thinking about the notion that this is step one of a series of steps that have to be taken?
That's exactly right. This is step one to a larger plan. You know, step one is fat and middle class wallets. Passing this bill delivers the tax cuts that we need to stimulate the economy. Step two is aggressive deregulation. That's something that the president's been doing since day one, breaking down the barriers, making it easier to invest in this country across every sector. There's these regulatory burdens of, I need to file this form, I need to do it by this date, and I need to comply with the myriad of different agencies that are around Washington, D.C., or within state government. That needs to be deregulated. It needs to be easier to invest. It needs to be easier to get things done. That deregulation is continuing to occur. And then another important component of this plan is reestablish American energy dominance. That's another component to this plan to accelerate economic growth. And a great speech I like to point folks back to is a speech or a conversation between Larry Kudlow and Secretary Bessent at the Economic Club of New York, where they were talking about what does it take to accelerate the economy, and they were laying this plan out. And it really crystallizes exactly what the potential of our country. And when we talk about some of those economic growth rates, what that means is that 3% forecasted, or that 3.8% forecasted economic growth, we're talking about trillions of dollars here, or, billions of dollars here, or some of these small arguments that are being had. But what that actually means is that's $10 trillion of economic growth that comes into our country that would be created if this plan is followed. And that really brings the affordable abundance that the president talks about, that we at AFPI have talked about, of a plan to bring incredible growth to this country to realize our full potential. And we have every opportunity to do it. And this is one step in that larger process.
I've participated twice in first helping with the Reagan 3-year tax cut and the deregulation of the Reagan era, and then the work that we did with the contract with America and our tax cuts and the impact of economic growth and the impact of things like reforming the welfare system. So I know this can be done. I want to ask you about one last thing which I've begun to work on, and that is I was at the announcement in the White House of the Make America Healthy Again report on children's health. It is terrifying how badly the health of American children have decayed in the last 20 years. It was startling to me. If you're a fiscal conservative, you really want to help accelerate getting to a healthy America, both because it's so much better for children to grow up healthy. If we could get back to, say, the kind of health we had for young people in 1960 or 1970, the amount we would save by moving from what is now a sick care system, where we only take care of you once you're sick, to a genuine health care system where we actually try to minimize the likelihood of you ever getting sick. So we're not saving money by cutting spending or by bureaucratic controls. We're actually saving money by having people be healthier. And my guess is, when you realize that healthcare in America is about 18% of the economy, and my guess is we would save at least 4% of the gross domestic product by getting to the Make America Healthy Again goals. That is more than enough savings to balance the budget and start to pay down the national debt. And I'm just curious what your reaction is to the idea that we need to approach very profound shifts from sick care to health care, take seriously Making America Healthy Again, and that it has both a human component that's enormously important, but it also has a really powerful fiscal component.
What you said and what's been this MAHA movement, I think, is critical to not just every individual in their personal health and the health of our families, but also the future of our country. It was President Kennedy who put in place a concept of gym class and establishing that concept. So it really comes full circle that Secretary Kennedy is also putting something else in place. And when you look at that 18% of GDP of what we spend on healthcare, it seems like there's an issue in this country of we take those, whatever is that largest percentage, and we just throw money at it. Well, we don't understand it, so we're going to throw more money at it. We need to stop that trend. And we need to start taking responsibility for ourselves. And it starts with a choice of choosing to live healthier and making those choices available. And that's what the start of the MAHA movement actually is doing, and putting those things in motion.
It seems to me that when we think about the next phase after this bill, that having the right kind of steps towards Making America Healthy Again may be the biggest single step we can take towards balancing the federal budget.
That's absolutely correct. Couldn't have said it better myself, or anyone else for that matter.
Well, on that cheerful note, Matthew, I want to thank you for joining me. Our listeners can learn more about the work you're doing at America First Policy Institute by visiting your website at americafirstpolicy.com, which we'll also have on our show page. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Absolutely. Humbled. Thank you.
Thank you to my guest, Matthew Henderson. You can learn more about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Pendley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.